I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a...
Really? I thought...
Well, was it? Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. You know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man, and there's no doubt she targeted Harry.
The whole thing was just stage managed to suit them.
This is not the Harry he was a few years ago, and the only reason he's not like that is he's following the requests of Meghan. He said himself, what Meghan wants, Meghan gets.
And so he was angry, and I felt, you know, we were punished for that.
What the world watched as a picture-perfect royal union might have been something else entirely. Something colder, calculated, controlled, because behind those polished smiles and that globally televised spectacle, whispers were already turning into warnings. And now, those whispers have names, faces, and testimonies that refuse to stay buried. The kind of testimonies that don't just question what happened, they force you to ask why it happened the way it did. Arthur Edwards wasn't just another photographer with the camera. Arthur Edwards was inside the system, trusted, present, watching everything unfold in real time. And what Arthur Edwards saw, it didn't match the fairy tale. Not even close. Because while millions saw elegance, Arthur Edwards saw tension. While audiences saw romance, Arthur Edwards saw anger simmering just beneath the surface. Harry, according to Arthur Edwards, wasn't glowing with joy. He was frustrated, snapping at staff, clashing with the very people responsible for making the moment historic. And then comes the detail that feels almost symbolic. The man who had documented royal history for decades was barely allowed to do his job. Why block the lens? Why restrict the narrative? What was so dangerous about letting things be seen exactly as they were?
And the photographers they engaged for the job was 5 feet away. You know, it was just hopeless. And then the carriage shot, when they went past me in the carriage, they looked the other way. So for me, it was a disaster. And
well, was that deliberate? You were made to feel unwelcome.
I felt so. I felt it wasn't just me; it was the whole of the British press.
But the discomfort didn't stop with attitude. It seeped into the environment itself. The heat wasn't just weather, it became a metaphor for everything going wrong. Arthur Edwards, dressed in heavy traditional attire, stood trapped in suffocating conditions at what should have been a carefully managed royal event. A summer wedding without proper shade? That's not a mistake. That's a failure. Guests fanning themselves, celebrities dropping composure, the illusion cracking under sunlight that refused to be softened. And here's the unsettling part: if something as basic as guest comfort was overlooked, what else was mishandled behind the scenes? What else slipped through because the focus wasn't on tradition, but on something else entirely?
When I think, you know, I've done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did Andrew's wedding. I did Sophie and Edward. You know, I mean, they were lovely occasions, but that today, I couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough, I promise you that.
The worst royal wedding.
Then comes the chaos that feels almost deliberate. Planning numbers didn't match reality. Expectations didn't match execution. Because while planners carefully calculated guest lists, something shifted quietly in the background. Meghan, moving pieces, adding names, powerful names. Oprah, Elton John, Tyler Perry. Names that changed the energy of the entire event. Suddenly, it wasn't just a royal wedding. It became something bigger, or maybe something different. Because when a guest list expands without structure, it doesn't just create logistical issues, it reveals priorities. And the question starts forming: was this a royal ceremony or a stage being set for something beyond the monarchy?
Events that happened on the actual wedding day itself. The guest list, beyond the lone family members she invited, was simply inviting celebrities who were total strangers to her. I could see, especially with a wedding of this scale, inviting a handful of people who you do not know, but certainly not to this extent. There were a huge amount of guests who she had never met. Some people didn't even come. Like, for example, Reese Witherspoon said, "Why would I go? I don't even know them."
And then the seating, the detail that seems small until you realize it's not small at all. Because in royal protocol, placement is power, position is respect. And what happened here? Long-serving royal figures pushed back. Celebrities knew, disconnected from the institution, placed front and center. That's not random. That's a statement. Arthur Edwards himself, someone who had earned proximity through years of service, suddenly viewing the ceremony from a distance, describing it like watching through a GPS screen. Detached, disconnected, almost as if the real story was happening somewhere else, just out of reach. And you have to ask who decided that hierarchy no longer mattered. And more importantly, why?
All my life, you know, and then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, you know, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And, you know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz.
But if the wedding hinted at tension, what followed exploded into something impossible to ignore, because the distance didn't shrink, it widened. Public appearances turned into public revelations. The Oprah interview didn't just tell a story, it rewrote the narrative entirely. Allegations, claims, accusations that shook the foundation of the monarchy itself. And Arthur Edwards, not convinced, not buying what was being sold. And then comes the speculation that refuses to stay quiet. Was Oprah invited to the wedding for a reason beyond celebration? Was that connection already part of a longer plan waiting to unfold?
You know, most of that interview was left on the cutting room floor because it was so one-sided and it was so unfair. When I think about watching it now and you know, the bit about Archie and the colour of his skin, and I knew they'd be seething. I knew the Queen would be seething. I knew that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles will be seething. It would be.
And just when it feels like the story has reached its peak, another voice steps in, Tom Bauer. And Tom Bauer doesn't soften anything. Tom Bauer doesn't hesitate. Tom Bauer goes straight to the heart of the controversy, questioning not just the execution of the wedding, but the intention behind it. Because according to Tom Bauer, this wasn't a love story unfolding naturally. It was something strategic, something deliberate, a path chosen long before the public ever saw the first headline. Meghan, in Tom Bauer's view, wasn't drifting into this world, she was moving toward it with purpose, searching for influence, for elevation, for opportunity. And when Harry appeared, according to Tom Bauer, that opportunity became real.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man in England from 2013 onwards, when her marriage had crashed and she couldn't find anyone in Canada at the time. And she wanted wealth and she wanted fame. And there's no doubt she targeted Harry and found someone who was a childhood friend of his who could introduce them. And then on the days before they met at their blind meeting in a club in London, she researched Harry very carefully and knew exactly what buttons to press.
And suddenly, every earlier detail starts to feel connected. The urgency, the speed, the resistance ignored. Even Prince William's reported concerns brushed aside as Harry moved forward faster than anyone expected. Why rush something so monumental? Why push forward when doubts were already surfacing? Because if this wasn't just about love, then timing becomes everything. And what happens when timing is driven by strategy instead of emotion? That's where the story stops being simple and starts becoming something far more complicated. Something that doesn't end at the wedding, but begins there. Tom Bauer pushed further into what happened around the wedding itself, pointing directly at the missing pieces, the absences that quietly reshaped the entire atmosphere of what should have been a deeply personal moment. Because within a surprisingly short period, everything accelerated, decisions were made quickly, and the pace didn't slow down even when Prince William reportedly raised concerns that in any other situation might have caused hesitation, reflection, maybe even delay. But here, those concerns dissolve into the background as the focus remained fixed on moving forward, faster and faster, toward a wedding that now begins to look less like a union and more like a turning point carefully approached with intention rather than caution. And then comes the detail that lingers longer than it should: the absence of Harry's closest circle, the quiet disappearance of long-standing friendships from a day that traditionally gathers the people who know you best. And that absence doesn't sit comfortably, because weddings are not just about who is present, they are about who is missing. And when several of Harry's longtime friends were reportedly not there, replaced instead by a wave of celebrity names that carried influence rather than history, it shifts the emotional weight of the entire event, it reframes the purpose, it raises a question that refuses to settle: what kind of wedding replaces familiarity with visibility, loyalty with status, personal bonds with strategic connections, and why would that choice feel necessary unless something beyond the moment itself was being built quietly in the background? Something designed designed not just for that day, but for what might come after. Because according to Tom Bauer, those celebrity invitations were not random additions, they were part of something far more calculated, a network being constructed in real time, a safety net forming before anyone publicly acknowledged that royal life might not last forever. And suddenly the guest list stops looking chaotic and starts looking intentional. Every name a potential bridge to another world, another platform, another future. One where influence operates differently but just as powerfully, and when you look back at the ceremony through that lens, it becomes difficult to separate coincidence from design. Difficult to believe that everything unfolded without a larger plan guiding it step by step, quietly, deliberately, almost invisibly to those watching from the outside. And just when the narrative feels like it has settled into a pattern, another voice enters, and Angela Levin doesn't soften what Angela Levin describes. Because Angela Levin witnessed something that didn't align with the image that had been carefully presented. Something subtle but powerful. Something that speaks not through actions but through reactions. Because when Angela Levin visited Harry during the period when everything was still unfolding, before the engagement had even been officially announced, there was already tension in the air. Already a sense of unease that couldn't be ignored, and the warning from an aide wasn't casual, it was direct, it was serious. It suggested that even mentioning Meghan could trigger discomfort, anxiety, a reaction that felt out of place for someone who had once been known for confidence and ease. And as Angela Levin reflects on everything that unfolded, the conclusion doesn't arrive as a shock but as a realization. Because when Harry and Meghan eventually stepped back from royal duties, it didn't feel like a sudden break, it felt like the continuation of something that had been building quietly from the beginning. Something that had already revealed itself in fragments during the wedding, during the preparations, during the choices that didn't quite align with tradition, and even Queen Elizabeth's response, calm yet unsurprised, suggests that perhaps the trajectory had been visible long before the public recognized it, that perhaps what the world saw as a shocking departure was, in reality, the final step in a path that had been set much earlier. And when Angela Levin describes the influence Meghan holds, the decision-making dynamic, the control over messaging, the shaping of public appearances, it circles back to the same unsettling thought that now connects every moment, every detail, every choice from the wedding day to everything that followed, and leaves a question that refuses to fade. A question that lingers long after the story seems complete. Because if everything was already shifting before the ceremony, if the signs were already there in the heat, the seating, the guest list, the tension, then maybe the wedding wasn't the beginning of the story at all. Maybe it was the reveal. The moment where everything hidden in plain sight finally aligned just enough to be seen, but not enough to be fully understood. And that uncertainty, that unresolved tension is what keeps the story alive, still unfolding, still unanswered.